What's going on, guys? BSG T2 Trek Fan 88 here. It is April 15th, 2016. It's currently 12:21 p.m. here, or I should say a.m., sorry. It's been a long day. I've made a few videos in the past, and if you haven't seen them, please go watch them. They're some of my best as far as I'm concerned. At least one of them is. April 15th, 1912. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So 14 years ago this morning, the RMS Titanic sank. And, the Titanic, which, by the way, every year, if I have time, if I'm not working, I will put on in the background. For instance, it's on my secondary monitor here. What I do is I time it, and you can do this with the James Cameron film from start to finish. I'll put it on the background and keep the volume kind of ear level. But long story short, when the ship goes under, the moment the last portion of the ship, which is the flagpole on the back of the ship on the stern, goes under, that's the exact time, my time, obviously I can't time it to ship time, but that's the exact time that the Titanic sank. Why do I do this? The Titanic means a lot to me for a couple of different reasons. I'll never forget, in third grade, I first learned of the Titanic. The ship that at the time was the most expensive, the largest, the most well-built, unsinkable. It was like the Avengers of that time. Everybody knew of it. You could be halfway across the world, not even know about, who's on it, but you knew of the Titanic when it comes to being a ship. It was just so grandiose back then. And me being who I am, somebody who loves old school build quality and workmanship, you look at, at least I look at, but you look at the books that I have, and there's a few of them that I now have after rebuilding everything. You look at the attention to detail and what things cost back then, and what the ship represented for not just the people who owned the ship or the companies that owned them or invested in them, or even the passengers that sailed them, but what the ship represented for mankind and the technological prowess that ship had. Yes, it was not unsinkable. Yes, the ship sank. There's great loss of life. And when I watch documentaries, which I still do, if I'm on break in the break room at my work, and last week there was a Titanic documentary on, I'm like, boop, boop, done watching it. And for a half hour, watched it. My coworkers are like, what are you doing? I'm like, watching the documentary, whatever. You want to change it, change it. There's a lot of things that I love about the Titanic, and partly because back in 95, 96, when the film was being developed, when I was in second, third, fourth grade, you had me learning about it in third grade by Mrs. McBride, my third grade teacher, from reading a novel or a book, whatever, a kid's book, and me taking the time. I'll never forget. It's one of those subjects that I went to the library on. I took out and rented or took home books upon books upon books on ship design, the Titanic itself, the history of it. It was just one of those things when you're a kid, you gravitate towards, and that's just something I gravitated toward. And of course, when I found out that they were making a movie, my mom actually laminated something from like People magazine or whatever, and I'll never forget this. I can remember it clear as day, and I wish I could find the People magazine or whatever magazine it was from. It was an aerial helicopter shot of the set of the Titanic itself that James Cameron and his wonderful production team, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people that built an almost one-to-one replica of the Titanic. If you know of the movie, they built a life-size, almost 100% deck-wise Titanic, and it's one of, in my opinion, the most, how can I put this? You look at the documentaries, you look at what went into the set design, the attention to detail, the time it took, where nowadays, CG. And you know what? There's something to be said about that. It's cheaper, it's quicker, it's more effective. But when you have these sets, Cameron and crew literally went to the companies that produced the actual china and the silverware and the lifeboats and the davits. They literally reproduced stuff that was on the original ship from the people who originally made them, from the companies who originally made them, I should say. And that's part of the reason why I love James Cameron as a director, and I would love to have 5 minutes with the man, let alone an hour or a half hour to talk to him. But the reason why I'm quickly filming this video here, it's 5 minutes, almost done. April 15th, there are a few days a year where I will stop in my tracks if I'm up. December 7th, obviously Pearl Harbor Day, I'll think of the times if I'm awake when I was in school. I remember, December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. I was walking in the hallway at the school, and I would look at the clocks that were up on there as I'm walking, and it's like, oh, this is when the attack happened, or this is when the Arizona exploded. Like right now, it's 12:56, I have the movie timed, when the ship sank, when it hit the iceberg, when the order was given to abandon ship to load the lifeboats, when, certain key events happened. And you could argue that part of me being a history guy, the Titanic is a big deal for me. But it's one of those things where, you watch the movie Titanic, and again, I'm an audio-video guy. Like, I'm keen about audio, picture quality, audio quality. But a lot of people love to make fun of or talk trash about Titanic. And yeah, you could go the route of, oh, it's a love story against this backdrop of a disaster. What movie hasn't done that? A lot. Pearl Harbor, all the 1960s, 70s, and 80s disaster films. And you know what? Yes. Does Cameron give us a story? Yes. But that's what cinema is for. That's what going to the movies is for, to live this fictional world or this realistic world. Yes, you have a love story set against the backdrop of the Titanic, which is one of the worst, what would you call it? Mechanical disasters of all time, whatever you want to call it. But his attention to detail, the set design, the build quality, the editing, the soundtrack, everything about the film, it's a James Cameron film, right? And you can sit there and nitpick and be a troll. Anybody who's a film critic or a film enthusiast, yes, it's a long movie, but you sit there, if you watch it on multiple viewings, you get what I'm saying. I love the subtle detail in this movie. As a Titanic guy who, I'm the kind of guy where I love looking at I call it super high resolution, but high resolution photographs of the ship before it set sail, of like the first class cabins, the dining rooms, the estates, the bridge, the engine room. I love looking at these photographs because it represents something to me that, back when this ship was built, this was it. This is the Empire State Building of its time of ships, or this was the One World Trade Center, whatever. It's the pinnacle of human engineering and design. And it's a tragic story. All of this time, money, effort, man hours, sweat, steel, rivets, hard work, gone. 2.5 hours after hitting an iceberg, gone. And I think that nowadays, with all the natural disaster films or the films in general, the younger audience doesn't have as much of an appreciation for this as I do. And I know I'm not the only one out there. And I'm not the only one in the future, after I'm long and gone. But I pride myself on the fact that I look at things like this when looking at documentaries or pictures or reading about the ship or first-hand accounts, and then watching a film that, in its own right, back in the day, Titanic is a juggernaut, even to this day. How long did it hold the record for how many tickets it sold? The soundtrack alone, there's a figure, I honestly forget the number right now, and I can't look it up right now. Titanic, to this day, is the #1 selling soundtrack of all time, period. And it's like if your average soundtrack sold like the equivalent of like 10 or 12 CDs, like at most, like Lord of the Rings, I don't know, an Avengers movie, popular films to this day sold, again, the equivalent of 10 or 12 soundtracks. Titanic sold like 850. I read this somewhere, I can't think of it, but mainly, obviously, back in the day, lack of internet compared to now, and My Heart Will Go On from Celine Dion, but also the soundtrack by James Horner. The fact that the thing won 11 Oscars, which to this day it deserved every Oscar it got. It's just one of those films based on a historical event, based on a or spawning from, or whatever, from a real life juggernaut. All of that intertwined to the perfect timeline for me being in third grade. So I wanted to put this out there, especially on April 15th. You know, there's a lot of interesting things about the film Titanic, A Night to Remember. You know, the novel itself, which I have read, the actual Titanic, the history around it. There's a great documentary. I will look this up for you because it's worth seeing. Give me 1 second here. I can't. Hold on. Give me 1 second here. There's a lot of documentary. Okay, I figured it out. Titanic, Blood and Steel. It's on YouTube. You can find it. This documentary, and this is the last of this video here. I know this has gone on a long time. You know, me being a guy who has known about the Titanic and researched it and loved the subject matter for a long time. When this came out back in, I don't know, 2012 or whatever, I think it was for the 100th anniversary, I was literally like, holy shit. Like, I felt like a kid again. The documentary basically talks about the people who built the Titanic. From the line-level grunt, steel pusher, to the businessman, Harlan and Wolff shipyards. But above all that, using real-life people and green screen effects, they essentially built the Titanic. That's why it's called Blood and Steel. And they show the ship being built. They recreate famous photographs. I literally, I think it was like midnight that I found this documentary, that I found like on YouTube or whatever, like the actual documentary, not just clips. And I had to work, at the time I was at the post office, I think. Yeah. And I was like, I'm fucking watching this. And I spent like 3 hours watching it. It's an amazing documentary. The computer animation for made-for-TV production is simply amazing. And it opened up, even though I know a lot about this subject, I have books, knowledge, I've seen documentaries. Watching this feature documentary and seeing the ship put together piece by piece. And again, I know it's a documentary made for TV, filmed, actors, etc. Looking at the lives of the people who built the ship, looking at the struggles. Like, literally, they spend a good chunk of change showing you what it took to build the ship. It was not pretty. It was hard. It was hot. Fucking back in the day, you worked 12 hours. You had 1 day off a week. You got paid nothing, even though it was a living wage back then. It's just I learned more about the ship than I had learned in 10 years. And the CG. There's a glory shot of the ship that I used in my 100th anniversary video special, and it I'm not going to say it brought me to tears. It didn't. I'm not that kind of guy. But it was emotional. And after the 2 hours or whatever, 3 hours watching this documentary, learning how the ship was built, how many rivets it took, again, I already knew that, but like seeing the process and how proud the shipbuilders were and the owners of the company were, and people at different stages of the build process, how proud they were, how amazing this ship was back in the day. Again, it was the largest moving object made by human hand back in the day, and that it technically held the record for a couple of years. To know that at the end of the documentary, it gives a brief summary. It doesn't show anything when it comes to the iceberg or the sinking. It just says, blah, 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 Titanic hit there. To know what happened to the ship, that's what's emotional. Like, you watch this documentary, and then you think about, damn, that's like me spending hundreds of hours on something just to lose it. And I have had that experience happen. My models that I built, my movie collection, my home theater, I kind of have a personal connection in the sense that, I have experienced that kind of loss. But watching that documentary, again, it's called Titanic, Blood and Steel. It was like a mini-series back in 2012. Go watch it, please. Anyway, this video's gone on long enough. BHG2 Track Fan 88 here. Have a good night.